most atheists I meet aren't actually kind of these sort of towering intellects who are there to demolish your faith. They're just people with genuine questions.
For more than 2 decades, he listened to arguments against God. What did he learn? Let's talk about it with Justin Brierly on Steve Brown, etc.
He's an old white guy, an author, broadcaster, and seminary professor who's sick of religion. And he's brought friends. Please welcome Steve Brown, etc.
Hey, we're so glad you're here. As I always say, you have a seat at our table. And we are aware of the great gift that you give us of an hour of your time in a busy day. We're doing the same for you, so you ought to be grateful too. You're wondering, I'm Steve, the aforementioned old white guy. Matthew Porter is our executive producer. He's here. If you're pale like Matthew, don't forget the sunscreen this summer. SPF 400 should do it.
That'll do it.
And our producer, Jeremy's in the little glass booth. He's all about that bass.
That's true. No trouble.
Our one-man IT department, John Myers, is in the tech bunker. John wonders why on a website cookies enhance performance, but in real life, not so much. And Dr. George Bingham is the president of Key Life. This summer, George has been searching for a sand dollar, $1,000 sand dollar donation to Key Life.
Thou sand dollar.
Yeah, $1,000. And Kathy White is the soft, feminine side of the program. We just had the 4th of July weekend. Kathy, I trust no parties got out of hand at the Lutheran Retirement Center.
Oh, yeah, I tell you what. There were some drag races and golf carts down the road, let me tell you.
We have a great guest. We've had him on before. He talks funny, but he really has some really good things to say. In fact, we're going to ask him. He had an interesting breakfast this morning. Anyway, Justin Brierly is a UK broadcaster, an author, speaker. He's created numerous high-profile podcasts in apologetics and theology. Justin has also written several books, the titles of which are incredibly long, and they have to print them in very small print to get them on the cover of the book. And for an old guy, that is an irritant. I just thought I needed to say that. The other book that we interviewed Justin about was The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, Why New Atheism Grew Old and Secular Thinkers Are Considering Christianity Again. And you didn't learn a thing from that title.
No,
So the title on this one that we're going to talk about is Why I'm Still a Christian After 2 decades of conversations with skeptics and atheists, the reason I believe. Justin, just so you know, were I a skeptic, and I'm not, were I not saved, and I am, even though many people have their doubts, were I an atheist, I simply would not be on a podcast with you. Before we get into this, what did you do this morning?
Well, this morning, as it happens, I was at the Houses of Parliament in London, not somewhere I frequently visit, but this morning was our parliamentary prayer breakfast, which happens once a year. And it's a sort of equivalent, I think, of something like the National Prayer Breakfast in Washington, D.C. But yeah, with several hundred MPs who came along, church leaders, and yeah, a wonderful time to pray, to worship, a wonderful talk from Professor John Lennox, and yeah, it was just it's a magical experience. You're sitting in literally a hall that's nearly 1,000 years old, with these sort of carved angels on the sort of the vaulted roof above you. And there really is something special about worshiping God in a space like that, and obviously at the seat of power in the heart of the UK. So yeah, a very special morning indeed.
Oh man, one of our staff members said it was all downhill after that.
This is his ministry.
Hey, listen, for those who maybe missed the broadcast the first time with you, take a little bit of time and fill us in on your unique work over 20 plus years.
So I've been hosting conversations essentially between Christians and non-Christians for over 20 years now. A lot of that time was through a show called Unbelievable with a question mark, a UK radio show and podcast that became a conference, book, and lots of other things over the years. And yeah, it gave me a front row seat really to some fascinating conversations. I learned a lot in the process about the reliability of Christian faith, the historicity, the arguments for God, and of course against God. But the book that I wrote and came on last time, your show to talk about, and I just wanted to say, I'm so pleased to see that the standards of humor have not changed since I was last on the show.
Yeah, still as low as before.
But no, the book I came on to talk about, it must have been last year, I think, was called, as you said, The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, a very long title. But it was all about the change I saw in the years of hosting these conversations from this very militant new atheist phase in the mid-2000s through to more recent years where I've seen a real change in the atmosphere. A lot more people, even often secular non-Christian intellectuals, willing to give Christianity a second look, certainly appreciating the value of faith, what it's done for the West, and asking questions about what happens if we lose the Christian story, and just a real sense that there's been a turning of the tide. Even in our very post-Christian secular West, there seems to be a new interest in faith. And what's really interesting, actually, Steve, since we had that conversation probably a year or more ago, is that there's been some fascinating research here in the UK, a lot of people talking about this, showing a really interesting uptick in the number of people going to church, especially among young people. And that's been the missing demographic in churches here in the UK for a long time. And so a lot of people have been talking about this quote unquote quiet revival that appears to be happening here in the UK. And it does seem to be a sort of confirmation in a way of what I wrote about some 2 years ago and was noticing from earlier on, that there's been a change in the atmosphere. So that was what I came on to talk about. And it's been exciting to see some of these recent developments.
That is so good. We have so many guests on this broadcast who, after they finish, you want to commit suicide. I mean, things are really, really bad. And man, your news is so good, I can hardly stand it. And it
Wow.
Your willingness to listen to others who disagree is an amazing thing. And I wondered, because you listen so intently, do you ever think about becoming a Buddhist or an atheist or something?
Well, when you put yourself in the firing line, as it were, or in the middle of those conversations, you do have to take the argument seriously. And so obviously I've always strived to be open, at least, to hearing different perspectives. Now, I've always had, in a sense, quite a strong Christian faith. There's been times of doubt, as there is in any person's life. So I wouldn't say I've ever seriously considered converting to another faith, though I've also often been challenged by difficult questions, either from people of other faiths or from many atheists. And so, yeah, it's not that I've never ever wavered. Doubts have come along. I wouldn't say that's gone as far as ever considering fully crossing the line to something else. It's more that I've had those moments where I've had important questions, objections that I've had to wrestle with myself. So sleepless nights, certainly at various points, especially in the early years, I'd say, of hosting the conversations when I was approaching some of these issues for the very first time myself. And that took a time, to work through. What I would say in the end, though, if this isn't too trite, is that I did eventually feel that although there were lots of difficult questions, and that will always be the case, I still felt in the end that when I put all the pieces together, my faith was actually stronger in the end. It had been sort of toughened up actually by the intellectual to and fro. And what I could be even more sure of than when I began was the sort of intellectual core of Christianity, the mere Christianity, if you like, of the central claims of faith. Now, there's a lot of stuff around that is up for debate and is harder to nail down. But the other thing I recognized is that actually we all come to life with some kind of faith. You know, my atheist friends, whether they realize it or not, have a faith of sorts, and their faith needs to be questioned as well. And I realized we're all in the end looking for truth, and we're all comparing, you know, evidence. And in the end, I found Christianity just made the most compelling sense of life, the universe, and everything.
You know, I often have told students that if they want their faith increased, go debate an atheist. Because it really, the process you describe is one that has been repeated by apologists of all time. Their faith is stronger because of the conversation that they've had with people who disagree. This is a great book, guys, and it's one you ought to read once a year. It'll really affirm you in some of the basic verities of the Christian faith. And we need to be reminded occasionally that this isn't a song and a prayer, but it has to do with the mind and thinking through some serious issues. The book is Why I'm Still a Christian. I don't think I have time to tell you the rest of the title. So
it's only an hour show.
We're going to back out and return just like Jesus. Thanks for joining us. We're talking to Justin Brierly, one of our favorite guests. He has a new book, which I hold in my nicotine-stained fingers, Why I'm Still a Christian. He is very careful to point out that there is a difference between a title and a subtitle. The subtitle is, After 2 decades of conversations with skeptics and atheists, the reason I believe.
I'm no historian, but I think titles are very important in England, so that's no small thing. Yeah. All right, Justin. So, such an interesting ministry that you have, bringing these different sides together. You know, it calls to mind a story that I've heard many times from different Christians, or maybe people who would call themselves non-Christians. Everybody has questions, but sometimes when they're growing up, well-meaning parents or teachers or Sunday school teachers, when a kid has a real question, they're like, no, don't ask that question. Just they push it down as if a question is somehow a threat to the credibility of the Bible or understanding God for who He is. What do you say to that? Because I can only imagine something not good would come from trying to suppress somebody's honest questioning.
Oh, absolutely. And the thing is that that may work for a while in a way, but you're only storing up trouble for yourself. Because I think kids inevitably, they can sense when adults are kind of basically just brushing something under the carpet. They can, and what they will take away when their question gets sidelined, overlooked, they're told that they can't ask that. That what they will psychologically take on board, I believe, is, oh, Christianity can't deal with these questions.
It won't
Christianity,
stand up to scrutiny.
Yeah, exactly. And that, whether you like it or not, that's going to shape the way they think about faith. That it's something that exists in a sphere that has to be, you know, hived off from the rest of the world and can't deal with the real life issues that are out there. So I think it's a really bad strategy from the get-go trying to duck these questions. Now, but the first thing I'd say is for anyone who is worried about those kinds of questions coming up is to say, if Christianity is true, then it can deal with this stuff. It may be that you don't feel ready yourself for those questions, But let's not assume that Christianity itself can't deal with some of the big questions and objections that are out there. And we're asked, you're right there in the pages of the New Testament, always be ready to give an answer to everyone who asks you about the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. And if the questions are coming from kids and whatever, that's it. We've got to, fulfill that mandate to be ready. So it's about simply doing some preparation and being willing to, I suppose, open yourself to maybe difficult questions, things that maybe will make you uncomfortable to some extent. But I would just encourage anyone who's doing that, it's worth it, honestly, because if Christianity is worth anything, then it's worth taking seriously on this level as well. And the worst thing we can do, I think, is to sort of wrap our kids in cotton wool and, shield them, put them in a bubble, only to wait till they kind of then have to deal with those questions outside of a Christian environment, maybe when they do end up in college or in a secular environment, and suddenly they're exposed to all these questions which you had carefully shielded them from. And when they finally are confronted with them, you know what's going to happen. It's going to be a disaster. What I would advise any parent, Sunday school teacher to do is to address those questions as early as possible, around the dinner table, in the Sunday school class, wherever, because that's the one time you might actually have a good chance of putting the best Christian response to that person's question. Once they're out in the world, you don't know what kind of response they're getting. If you're relying on Google, they're going to get a real variety of quality answers. So I would just say you've got to grasp the nettle and you've got to have those conversations.
Do you think Christians don't engage unbelievers because of a feeling of inferiority about their own faith, that those guys are really smart and I'm really not? If they will do that, they'll be in for a surprise, won't they?
I think so. I think there is a fear, and it's understandable, because I think to some extent, a lot of people in the secular atheist world have cast themselves as these intellectual giants, who are going to demolish your faith in 10 seconds as soon as you put your head above the parapet. So I understand where that fear comes from. The reality is, actually, most atheists I meet, your common or garden variety of atheists, aren't actually kind of these sort of towering intellects who are there to demolish your faith. They're just people with genuine questions. And actually, we sometimes imagine the conversation is going to be far worse than it actually is. And what I would want to say to someone who is worried about whether there's going to be questions asked that they don't have answers to is that's okay, because the answer, I don't know, is a perfectly acceptable answer.
Sure. Yeah.
But the important thing is to keep the conversation going. Say, I don't know the answer to that question, but it's a good question. I'm going to go away and have a think about that, do some research, talk to some people. And could we meet up again and continue this conversation? The worst thing you can do is just run away, duck the question, sort of never engage, because then you really are giving up. And for me, it's just not an option for Christians,
Good stuff.
Justin, when I think about people that are atheists, and you think of certain questions that people always ask, like, well, if there's a God, why does he allow suffering? And, on and on like that. And I'm sure that over all these years that you've encountered all of those questions, that question and a lot more. But I'm wondering, is there a particular, you don't have to name a name, obviously, is there a particular person that you encountered, or a particular issue that kind of sticks in your mind that was one that really made you kind of like pause and say, oh, wow.
Yeah. Oh, plenty, as I said earlier.
And we're coming up on a break, of course. I took too much time to ask that.
I'm going to I'll try and keep this one short, but there's a famous Bible critic called Bart Ehrman, and he's written some popular level books really questioning the historicity of the New Testament documents. And when I read his most popular book on this subject, Misquoting Jesus, it really kind of made me question a lot of things. I had a sleepless night or two, because he had some hard questions in there about how we've received the documents of the life of Jesus and whether they contain errors and things. What I discovered by the time we came to host the debate, and I brought on an eminent Cambridge theology professor opposite him, was that there's always two sides to every story. And I was just amazed when I came out of that conversation to see the way that this Cambridge professor completely flipped the script on so many of his assumptions, and just a little bit of recasting made me realize that the New Testament documents have an extraordinarily good historical pedigree compared to any other form of ancient literature. So often it is about simply, you hear one thing, go away, have a look into it. You'll soon find people actually do have answers to these questions. Just one example, but one of many I could mention.
Oh man, so saying I don't know, but I'm gonna check is appropriate. Running is cowardice. So the main message from Scripture is don't be a weenie.
That's it.
Guys, the book, and you really need to get a copy of this, Why I'm Still a Christian, Justin Brierly. And you'll rise up and call me blessed for having told you about it. Hey, this is hard work. We're going to have some cookies and milk, rest up, and then we'll come back. Thanks for being with us. We're hanging out with author and broadcaster Justin Brierly. And by the way, take this down. You can keep up with him at Justin Brierly. Brierly is spelled Brierley, justinbrierly.com, and on X at JUS Brierly.
Nice.
Justin, Kathy made reference to it, and you have a chapter on what you call the atheist's greatest objection, I think, is the problem of pain and suffering. And she sort of alluded to it. How did you, and keeping in consistent with your title, what things worked for you in terms of an explanation of that?
Wow.
And then how do you share that with an atheist?
Gosh, I mean, it's such a huge question, and we'll only have time to graze the surface of it here. I think one of the first things, though, I would want to say to anyone who's opening up this subject with someone who's a non-Christian is to say, be careful about where this question is coming from for people. It's not just an intellectual question. Very often it's coming out of a place of personal hurt, perhaps tragedy in someone's life. And in that case, what they may be looking for in that moment may not be an intellectual answer. It may be that they just need you to sit and weep with them, But if the time does come for that question, and it is probably the oldest question, the oldest book of the Bible, Job, is all about this question of suffering and God, then I think there are some answers. And I try to present some of them in the book. Ways in which you can look at why, yes, even in the midst of suffering, God may have reasons, purposes, things that he's doing that are often completely beyond our ability to understand, but which in God's bigger purpose, he may have some kind of purpose for. And I try to sketch out what some of that might look like. For instance, there are many people for whom suffering as uninvited as it has been in their life has also been the catalyst for some kind of transformation. There are ways in which often it's only by going through some kind of pain or suffering ourselves that we're able to be people who can help others. Think of people who lead Alcoholics Anonymous groups. They're frequently people who have had to deal with the pain of addiction themselves. They can only help others because they've gone through the fires of that. I think of the fact that it's only in a world where people are in need that we can practice generosity. There's something about the fact that we do live in this kind of world means that in his grace, God can redeem, can do something with that. I also just want to own up to the fact, though, that there's a lot of suffering in the world that it's hard to explain on that level. A certain amount of suffering, you could say, is down to humans, obviously our freedom, the ways we've misused that freedom. And if we expect God to leap in and wave a magic wand and stop us ever doing anything evil or wrong, then we would effectively be robots, puppets, really. And we wouldn't have anything like human freedom. And that's a sort of pretty, often given response to the problem of suffering and evil. But at the same time, there's a lot of evil that happens in the world that doesn't seem to be down to our human freedom. There's disease, and there's earthquakes, and there's natural disasters and things. So I'm trying to deal with an awful lot of different kinds of stuff in this chapter. And when it comes to that sort of evil, what you might call natural evil, I think that's a tougher one. And for me, that's where you have to sort of really enter into the Christian story to make sense of that. And that is a story in which something has fundamentally gone wrong in our world, in this universe. That somewhere along the line, some people call it the fall, others talk about a sort of angelic rebellion even further back. Evil entered the world, and the world is somehow out of kilter. It's not the way it should be. I like the way that someone I mentioned earlier, the Professor John Lennox, a Christian thinker in Oxford, he says, we're looking at a world that is both beautiful and broken. He talks about beauty and bombs. This is the reality of the world we live in. But that is the world that the Bible describes for us. It's a world where evil and sin has entered and messed things up. Now, the question is, has God left it that way? And the answer in the Christian story is no. God has done something about it. God has come in person to be the solution to this. And for me, to really answer the question of suffering, you have to, in the end, look at Jesus. Because there, on a cross, God is the answer to the biggest question ever. Because it's God himself experiences suffering. God knows what it is. And sometimes the best answer I can give to someone who is going through suffering is not a sort of clever philosophical theodicy. It's to say, God knows how you feel, because God has experienced this. And that may be the best answer you can give someone in the end who's actually going through suffering, is to say, God's with you. God's been there. And often that's the only thing that actually often people that gets them through those extremely difficult times.
Mm-hmm. I think I mentioned on the last time we talked that I used to do a skeptics forum in a very small way, kind of what you do, and we invited atheists and agnostics. That question, I would make a list of questions they wanted to talk about over the series, and that one always came up, but I made sure that it was number 8. And before we went there, we went to Jesus, because the strongest answer is the one you just gave. He's been there. He's done that. And it's painful. But it's all right when you're discussing this to say, I have my questions too.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not pretty, the life. And so there are times when I wonder. That's okay. Hey, guys, we're going to... Don't... Write this book down. I'm going to give you the name title, Why I'm Still a Christian, Justin Brierly. Amazon can handle that. You ought to get it. Thanks for spending time with us here. By the way, we just released our digital summer magazine. It has encouraging articles just like our print magazine, but 0 chance of paper cuts.
Kind of like that.
So check it out free. So don't complain. We're giving it to you, okay? At keylife.org/digital magazine.
Justin, you've been in this unique space of bringing believers and atheists and skeptics together. Over 20 years, you've got to have. I'm curious to know any stories that have come out of this, that after this conversation, this person did this or this person changed their mind, or anything like that stands out in that time.
Well, the first thing that's worth saying is that it was very rare for the participants in the dialogues to sort of change their mind, especially not, within the hour or two that we were having the debate. They were kind of coming in to make their case on either side. And so I never really expected much change of mind in that case. Having said that, even some of the people over the course of years that I have had on the show have changed their mind, actually. I mean, one interesting example that springs to mind is we once did a dialogue between a Mormon and a Christian, an ex-Mormon believer, and the Mormon came on as a sort of apologist for the Mormon faith, Joseph Smith, and everything else, and this other person who was the ex-Mormon Christian sort of did a very good job, I thought, of responding. And it was very interesting because a couple of years later, that Mormon apologist got in touch with me and said, I've left Mormonism, and your show was actually quite a significant moment in me coming to realize I couldn't really sustain the beliefs that were, against the gospel and Christianity. So that's just one example, a kind of rare example where actually someone on the show did sort of actually change their mind because of the show. But the effect that the conversations mostly had, of course, was on the people listening. And so one of the absolute privileges for me of hosting the show over so many years was that it wasn't just Christians tuning in. Because of the podcast became very popular, especially actually in the US, North America, other places in the world. A lot of people on both sides started listening. A lot of atheists started tuning in. Every time I would have a kind of well-known atheist speaker on, they would disseminate it to their blog or their social media. And I'd find, a whole new raft of new skeptical listeners joining me. So I was in this unusual position of having a very mixed, diverse listenership via the podcast, and really feeling the sense that I need to do right by both the believers and non-believers who were listening, trying to be as fair as possible to both sides when hosting these conversations. And it was very interesting because sometimes, the Christian would do a great job, and other weeks not such a great job. And it wasn't as though it was set up to be one person always wins the argument. It was very, organic. The chips fell the way they did in any given week. What I did notice, though, is that over those years, as I got to know and befriend a lot of, skeptics and atheists who started listening to the show, is that people who started listening, very confirmed in their atheism, very anti-religious, usually softened over the period of listening, even over a year or 2 years. And even if they hadn't become a Christian by the end of that, they'd often changed the way they think about faith. And they would at least say, well, I'm no longer a sort of arrogant, dismissive atheist. I can see that there's obviously some intellectual aspect to Christianity. Because if you've listened to enough intelligent Christians making a cogent case for faith, I think you have to kind of at least give it some credit. And so for me, that was a win. If you've kind of moved from hard-boiled atheism to agnosticism, that's some movement. But of course, I was very encouraged when I did hear of people who had, crossed the line to Christian faith, and the show had in some way played a part in that. One brief story I could mention is someone who is a good friend of mine now and a colleague. I've worked alongside him for a few years now, but he started listening to the show as an agnostic atheist, but got very involved in a kind of chat forum that I hosted around the show at the time. And I remember clearly when he came on the show, I once invited him on during that time, and he said, oh, the thing is, I don't think I could ever become a Christian. I do find it really interesting, but I don't think I could become a Christian. Well, a few years later, he became a Christian. And it was, there was a number of circumstances that went into that. And obviously, the show was just one of a number of things. But I now work alongside him. And the interesting thing is he's got a testimony where he says he was basically persuaded of atheism by well-known atheists like Richard Dawkins. But ironically, it was also Richard Dawkins who led him to become a Christian, because once he started down that road of investigating his arguments, he suddenly started to bump into Christian thinkers who were responding. That's how he came across my show. And that process eventually led him to give his life to Christ. So it's amazing. This is a very long game, though. Sometimes these are often stories that take place over decades, not just the course of a 2-hour conversation. So, but it's been wonderful to be part of some of those journeys of faith that people have gone on.
Oh man, talk to us, and you're probably more than anybody that I know the right person to ask. Talk to us about some of the things that you found important in talking with people who disagree. I mean, obviously, telling them they're going to, if they don't turn, they're going to burn in hell isn't the best way to do it. So kind of teach us.
I think, in some ways, lots of the greatest examples are right there in Scripture. You know, when Paul engages with the skeptics on Mars Hill, the Areopagus, you know, he's a wonderful example of how to culturally meet people where they are. He quotes from their own philosophers and poets to sort of make his points, but he's very, at the same time, he's absolutely down the line in terms of what this means, that there is this man, Jesus, he's been raised from the dead. So I think you always want to, wherever you begin the conversation, you want to bring it to Jesus in the end, because that's at the core of Christianity. And I never want to have, I never want to sort of leave a conversation too abstract, purely talking about God in purely philosophical terms, because in the end, Christianity isn't just a kind of God of the philosophers. It's a God who became very real, knowable. And so I always want to, in the end, bring people back to a conversation about Jesus. So for me, that's important. But alongside that, I would say, listen, you know, as much as you talk, be ready to listen. Don't treat people just as a sort of argument to be conquered. The more that you listen, and listen in a way where you're willing to take on board what they're saying and then to respond, I think you're far more likely to actually have some fruit from a conversation. If people feel like they're just being talked to, or, you know, you're just using them as sort of target practice for an argument, I think they quickly get the picture. But I would say, be ready to listen, be ready to respond, and pray. In the end, this is a work of God, not just our good responses and arguments. And for me, when you combine evangelism, apologetics, and prayer, it's a really amazing combination.
Justin, you are a gift to the body of Christ. We're glad for you. You keep writing. I hope we can have you on again, and maybe often. Maybe I can start talking like you and make some more money in the States. Justin,
It's
God
been an
bless
absolute
you.
pleasure. Thank
Hey,
you so much. God bless you guys.
And thank you, too. Guys, we're going to come back, tell you who we're going to do it unto next week, and you're going to be absolutely amazed. So don't go anywhere. Great hour. He's always, or the other time, we all liked him a lot, and we like him even more after this hour. You know, these are the kinds of issues that a lot of Christians don't spend a lot of time with, and probably for the wrong reasons, because atheists don't pray because they're afraid that there may be a God, and it scares the spit out of them. Christians don't pray because they're afraid he may not show, and that's all they've got. When you move into apologetics, it's kind of like that too. Atheists love apologetics because they're sure there's no God, but it scares the spit out of them that there might be. But Christians, we're afraid that we're going to encounter somebody who knows more than we do, and you won't. In this area, that we will listen to their arguments and we'll leave the faith, and it's all we've got. So it's better to hold it close, keep it quiet, go over in a corner and just be still so nobody notices. And Justin spending time with us disabuses that viewpoint. And I'm glad he does, because the thing that you'll discover if you're willing to get out there and talk with real people with real questions, is that you have answers, and that they really need those answers. Be vulnerable, be open, pray, as Justin said, listen, as Justin said. But the bottom line is, if you want your faith to be greater and deeper and to make more of a difference in the world, risk it. Put it out there. Let the questions come, and you're in for a great surprise. Who's going to be next week?
Next week we have 4 guests.
Oh, man, we don't have room for 4 guests.
Well, that's why we have Zoom. But actually, we won't even need Zoom. We have had so many comments about these 4 that we decided to have them back again. That would be Matthew Porter, George Bingham, Steve Brown, and Kathy Wyatt.
Couldn't get a guess, could you?
No, we actually decided. We had so many positive comments from people about the last couple times that it's been just us that we decided to be just us again.
Oh, man, you guys show up. We've got room for one more. Next week, same time, same place. Join us. Between now and then, don't do anything we wouldn't. And that gives you a wide, wide berth.